Good morning and welcome to the Think React Lead radio show. I'm your host, Dom Faussette, executive coach and leadership speaker with Think React Lead, here with you on Intelligent Talk 960, the Patriot KKNT. I've got a guest here. Normally I have a story prior to the guest, but we got a lot to cover. I'm assuming this is going to be a pretty high-speed, low-drag radio show. And you're going to hear me use several military verbs and verbiage simply because of the individual that I've got in studio. Folks, let me, before we go all in on who I've got in the studio, understand where our society is today and what you don't know can and will negatively impact you. We've got in studio Raul Martinez. Raul is originally from the inner city of Chicago, and during a youth surrounded by gangs and violence, as well as fond memories of the old neighborhood. He later joined the military and deployed to Iraq in 2007 and 2008. He came home and became a Chicago police officer, working undercover narcotics, then instructor for the police department. Now he leads the training divisions with Fieldcraft Survival, a training preparedness and survival company. Folks, let me explain to you why I showed up in this man's DM probably more than I needed to, asking him if he would be here on the show. And the reason why is because you find somebody on social media that just kind of has the same passion, the same drive, the same goal of changing and positively impacting lives. They just do it very differently. And he's very active on social media. I'll provide his handle here during the show. But Raul, thank you very much for coming in, brother. I greatly appreciate that.
Good morning. Thank you. No, it's good to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Thank you. You've been traveling all over the place, training. We have similar backgrounds as it relates to how we grew up, as it relates to the military, and then law enforcement. I really want to jump into, and if you're okay with this, just jump into the first topic of inner city violence and what it's like to police those areas.
Absolutely. So having grown up in the city, for me it was different to see it from that flip side, right? As a kid, I would run from the police.
Right.
Be like, police were bad.
Of course.
And then at some point the shift changed and it was more like, okay, police aren't that bad. And it's what you said, the more you know, the more educated we are,
right,
the more we see the roles that people play in society. So I started to learn more about law enforcement that way. And for us, it was either, at a certain point, it was either you're a fireman, you're a cop, or you're a cook at a restaurant, because that's what we were surrounded by, cooks, and
right,
the local guys were firemen.
Makes sense.
And then there was gangs and everything else, right? The fun, easy way out of everything
of
with
course,
fast money, and everybody thought you were cool and tough as nails. So it was like, man, deciding where to go with that. So growing up, everything from shootings to people being kidnapped, the amount of violence against women and kids and drugs. Where I grew up in Pilsen, so Pilsen is a very Hispanic area in Chicago.
Okay.
Now it's a little more gentrified, so if you mention Pilsen now to somebody who didn't know Pilsen in the 80s and 90s,
right,
they'd be like, oh, that's not bad. You know, they got
you're like,
skateboards.
Same thing with my neighborhood
right,
growing up.
Yeah, so it's very different. And if you can imagine the grain silos, I haven't seen any out here as much, but these giant grain silos were like lookout points. So the dudes would climb up and they'd look out and be like, hey man, cops 3 blocks away, this and that. They'd be like chatting it down these tubular stairs.
Right,
like
right.
It's so crazy.
Or you hear some weird, like, oh shoot, what was that? That's the sound.
And you're letting everybody know what's
right,
going on. So that whole concept of, like the moms in the windows, they'd yell at the other mom across the street and then she'd pass it down and it'd finally get to you and you're supposed to be home. And you were supposed to be home at 5, but by the time it got to you, it's 7. So you're late,
and you're getting your butt
and you're being punished for it. But the violence there started to paint a different picture. It was more like, well, how is this happening, right? And it feels like home. So I was back and forth between Mexico and the States. So seeing violence in Mexico, which was a lot less then, right? It wasn't as crazy as it is now. Okay. And even now, it's the way why I'm piecing this together is the violence in Mexico is similar to the violence in the States. It's pockets. It's in certain areas, and the areas have something to offer, right? So when I go to different cities, like you were mentioning, I travel a lot. I always wonder to myself, what's the industry here? What's driving people to live here? Why are there houses here? Why does this look like a shack and there's a brand new car, and then this looks like an awesome new house in the mountains and there's old pickup trucks, right? There's this disparity that we see, and that's kind of how violence was. And I was seeing it from Mexico to seeing it now here in the States, where it's becoming a lot more like no one cares about it, and because nobody cares, it becomes okay. Right? So everybody now is just kind of like, that's normal. Well, no, breaking and rioting and taking people off the street in vans, it's not normal. It shouldn't be normal.
What do you, if you don't mind asking, what do you think attributes to that? And I'm coming from a space of growing up, you'd have a friend die, you go to school. And by lunch, you're joking about it. But it didn't happen every week. There, the neighborhoods were we took care of our own within the community. Now, there's this, and you mentioned it, there's this lack of emotion. It's almost like people are so disconnected from it that it's like, hey, as long as it's not happening here, we don't care. Why do you think that is?
So in the old sense of community, people cared about who their neighbors were, right? You can ask people nowadays, like, who's your neighbor? Like 3 houses down. I have no idea. And not knowing that makes you care less, right?
That makes
and it's
sense.
almost like a safety blanket. So I'm not saying that people do it intentionally to be mean, but it's safer to not know certain things than it is to know them, right? The whole concept of ignorance is bliss.
Right.
So people don't want to know because now they're included, even though it should be that way. It should be like, I should know all of my neighbors here and all of my neighbors this way, and now we can all take care of each other, is kind of what you're saying. Like the community vibe was there for a little while. And then little things shifted and happened, and then people stopped caring about one neighbor, and then they got too busy perhaps, and then they didn't have time to interact with this neighbor, and then there was this disparity. People moved, kids grew up, right? So now there's new people involved, and creating a new relationship is difficult, right?
It is, especially nowadays.
And you don't know where they're at, and now this like divide with politics, it's crazy. So because of the lack of that community, there's less caring, I think. That's going to be my guess.
So policing areas like that, I used to walk my beat when I was in Jackson, Mississippi, and that saved my life on several occasions. What was it like for you to go from having the years of going back and forth, but you're in the inner city, now you're a police officer, you have a better understanding than I say most people coming out of the academy, but what was it like for you to police the inner city?
So for me, it was one, it was this really awesome, like, hey, here you go, kid.
Right.
Go do this cool stuff.
Exactly.
Go, not like save the world, but go make a difference.
Right.
And though I didn't want to save the world or change anything, I wanted to have some sort of impact on somebody who was going to make a decision that could affect me or the rest of the guys on the team. So I was very interactive. I would talk to people. We did something similar. We had to walk a beat for the first 6 months of the probationary period with Chicago. You have to walk an area. It's just foot patrols.
Right.
And though most people were like, I don't want to do that. That's dangerous as can be. And it was. It wasn't an easy task to be put in the ghettos of Austin neighborhoods and on the south side where you get caught alone. That's
it's a wrap. Yeah.
And there's 3-4 dudes coming out. You got to either be ready to scrap, which a lot of guys don't understand. Fighting is important. It's more important than the gun and stuff you carry.
It's a respect. I remember the first fight I won. So the first 3 fights as a cop, I lost. Got tossed.
We all get beat up.
Right? I'm like, whoa, these dudes are strong. Way stronger than the guys in the ring. But then when the neighborhood saw that I was a scrapper, I stopped having problems. Nowadays, everything's camera. There's cameras and recorded.
Right.
Society, I don't think, understands that fighting is a necessary evil. How did you explain that as a cop, and then you as a trainer? How do you combat that?
So you talk about it. You express it in terms where it makes sense to people. And I would give them little tidbits. So when I'd be walking the beat, right, as a new cop, I'd be walking the beat and I'd see little kids scrapping, slap boxing.
Right.
They're 5, 6 years old.
Right.
Slap boxing. And I'm talking about like
hard,
like bloody lips and tears. And, and I'm like, this doesn't happen in all communities. These kids are growing up a certain way because they understand the dynamic of the strong survive.
Correct.
And it's not a dig on people who don't like violence and who don't want to promote that, but you have to be strong enough to take care of yourself and have the respect, right? So even guys that are really jacked, they get respect just because they're really big.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't know how to fight, but he looks a certain way, and that's part of the puzzle, right?
Correct.
So these kids growing up, they're slapboxing, they're fighting. I'm like, cool. So I would jump in and just play. I'd tap the heads, and they'd touch my gut, and because they're small little kids.
Of course,
but
quick.
that, like you were saying, the interchange and understanding, that was a way for me to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
So later on, I had their respect, and they grew up, right? They would grow up to be teenagers, and those are the most dangerous demographics, the teenagers.
13
that
to
have
7,
nothing
16,
to lose.
yeah.
And they're going to get a book report even if they shoot somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, I'll do it for the block.
Right.
And they're gung-ho. But getting their respect was that. It was slapping kids around, playing with them, being playful. And I think even now, parents miss that opportunity to play with their kids.
They
to
do.
slap them around and be playful and aggressive. Like even me with my young one, I play with him, I'm rough.
Right.
And though everybody looks at me like,
what's
I'm
going
like,
on?
Trust
No,
me.
we got this.
This stuff is going to help in the
Right.
future. And I did something similar to the whole like scrapping thing, and I know it comes out of movies, and people are like, "That's bullshit," or "That's
I got you.
That's not realistic." I have friends to support this statement. An old timer, right? And by old timer, I mean 30-year-old guy.
Okay.
Been in prison, in and out. He was the guy in the neighborhood.
Right.
He saw that we were newer guys. He saw we were patrolling.
Mm-hmm.
He came out of his house one day, and he's like, "Man, I'll screw all you guys up." Blah blah blah. And I was like, "Man, let's go." I took my belt off, threw it in the car, took my
Right.
vest off, threw
Oh,
it in the
man.
car.
Right.
Like, this is out of a movie. People are like, nah. And I'm like, I'll bring people to support
Mm-hmm.
this. And my buddy's like, hey, this is a terrible idea. Terrible
You're
idea.
like, trust me, I know what I'm
We're
doing.
going to get fired for this.
Right.
And well, now that I can't get fired, it doesn't matter.
Right, it doesn't matter.
But I could have. It could have been this crazy disregard for the community and being disrespectful in a way. They could have spun it however they wanted.
Correct.
But that moment, and whether or not we were going to scrap, I'm in. I would have done
Right.
it. We got close. His wife got in between both of us. My partner was like, hey, this is dumb. Let's not do this. And she was logical. She's like, well, guess what? If he starts to lose, his buddy's going to get you.
That makes
And
sense.
Everybody had logical explanations. He and I, though, we were zoned in. We were in this, like, we're ready to go. It's good. It's good to relive those things. Those are stories that sometimes we forget.
Mm-hmm.
And then having a conversation with even somebody who's just been in the business,
Right.
you remember other things, right? So I know we were talking more of the violent stuff. And look, shooting people from what I've seen, from one person to another, younger guys, they do it. So a lot of dudes get shot in the back and in the buttocks.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's that they're scared of their gun.
Mm-hmm.
But we would show up to these calls, and this guy has shot 22 times, right? And just to show people and have you guys understand, there's training in the ghettos. There's training in these low-income communities. These guys know medical procedures, so they ball up to preserve their organs and keep the blood flow to the core. And I debriefed one of the guys, and he's like, yeah, we were taught this. So we would stay alive, but we get shot, and there was no medical attention. I'm like, man, and it worked. That
Wow.
one dude was alive, one dude wasn't.
It happens.
He just got hit differently,
Yeah.
right? But not only the violence that we would see from person to person, but violence within the disparity of minds of people, right?
Man,
Losing
let's
hope.
talk about that. Yeah.
That's the stuff that's really sad, that like almost breaks your heart, right? Like moms being frustrated. So here there's a lot of resources, right, for like moms to take their kids and be like, hey, I'm frustrated. How do you help me? And people know how to ask for help.
Not in Chicago, not in Jackson, Mississippi.
Not,
but
that's what I'm saying. Here is different.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
there's like there's groups that come to your house and talk to you. When I was a cop here, they would do that. I'm like, that's a great resource.
Right.
They don't have that where I'm
No.
from. So I remember going to calls and hearing over the radio, hey, baby found in a dumpster, frozen.
Yeah.
So January, February, Chicago weather, it's brutal.
Yeah, it's brisk,
right?
to say the
Sub-zero.
least, yeah.
It's just bad. And finding babies there and then talking to like frozen babies, and then the mom's just like, I just needed a break. I was walking down the street that looked like a safe place. I came back 5, 6, 7, 10 a day later, and the baby's frozen and dead, and she has nothing to, you know what I mean? So now she's mentally distraught from the act itself.
Correct.
But she was mentally distraught before that.
Yeah,
so
she
these
was.
two compounded. The girl didn't know what to do or where to go, and the resources aren't there, right?
And you don't know what happened to her.
Exactly.
Like there's some things negatively happened to her. She did not have an easy childhood.
Somebody failed her.
Right.
Yes.
Several times.
Yes.
For her to get to that space. But
Where she would think that would be a reasonable option, right? And this is where I'll say, the majority of the problems that we have in society are parent-based. It's bad parents. It's not bad kids. It's bad parents. It's people unwilling to educate and promote a better way of doing things. Maybe their parents failed them, right? So now there's this trickle effect.
Right.
But we need to be able to talk about these things. And people are, one, too prideful. And they're prideful in something that it doesn't make sense. You're proud of what? You're proud that you've never seen a white person in 7 years? Like, that's not something to be proud of. I remember having this small, petite, blonde female partner, and we go into this house, and it was a domestic call, and we're dealing with the kids, and this little 3-year-old pops out, and he asked my partner if he could touch her, because he'd never seen a white person with blonde hair and blue eyes.
Oh, wow.
Not even on
here
TV,
in the United States
Chicago.
of America.
3 years of life. The only thing the kid knew was the little neighborhood he lived in, and he wanted to touch a white person because he had never seen one, right? Who creates those situations?
Parents.
The parents do.
Right.
And again, I know it's a little slightly off topic with violence, but it's just
fine.
to showcase that if we just take a little bit of responsibility for what we do,
correct,
we can find resources, and we can just be better people, and then we can avoid some of this nonsense.
If we as parents even adults take responsibility for the things we allow our children to watch,
absolutely,
the stories. There are some stories that my wife knows about my background that my son will never know, or at least until he's older. I think we a lot of times, and again, this is off topic, but we try so hard to be our kids' friends, and still try to look cool for our kids, as opposed to just being a doggone parent.
Yeah, you have to, and it's a hard job. Like you said, you're waiting, if even, to tell him that story. But it sounds like you're waiting for when he can make his own opinion based on the information that he has as a person. Right. You're not going to influence a decision because at a certain age you can influence that. Yes. And that's the whole school concept right now. Instead of being just neutral and giving them information and then allowing them to create their own process.
Right.
That's what we need. Not, hey, this is what I believe, you need to believe this too.
And that comes with patience.
It is. That's the biggest thing is patience, but people don't have it. And again, it's technology that's making us want things quickly, and so we want things quickly with our child.
Very true.
To change a piece of behavior with 3 to 4 weeks, and you have to commit to that and not get frustrated and not get mad, and that's tough.
That takes time. It is tough, and I'm talking about really parental accountability, but I want to go into this accountability and the self-reliance aspect that, one, I know you teach. I've read several of your posts. Do you have a book?
I don't, but
you probably have one in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I have a friend really, really pushing me to come out with books that are topic specific. So my views on law enforcement, because I have very, very old school views. Like, I don't think people should be, or police should be as present as they are. We should be what we were intended to be. Only a presence and not so interactive with people in a bad way.
What are your thoughts on this? This is my view on law enforcement. I think the standards are too high. So you take a kid out of Scottsdale, no matter what he looks like, and then you thrust him into, we don't have really tough neighborhoods here, but let's say we had a tough neighborhood. But you thrust him into that neighborhood. There's no, and I'm going to say a subsect of cultural understanding or a better understanding of diversity of a mindset and actions. And there's certain cultures that they're yelling and cursing. That's just normal conversation.
That's how
doesn't require a gun.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the current standards of law enforcement?
So in Chicago, it's the same way, right? You have to live in the city to be a cop, right?
Okay.
To be a cop for the department, but you don't have to be from the city.
Right.
So we would get these kids no street education, and I don't say, hey, you have to live in these neighborhoods to learn it, but you have to have an open mind. Study the people that you're dealing with. You study things before you buy them, so you would need to know where you're getting into. And what you're saying is legit. I can have my perceived way of doing things and how we interact, but it's not how everybody interacts.
Correct.
So when people yell and scream, I don't get offended because I'm like, okay, cool, this is how they do it. All right, so I'll wait for them to calm down, and then I'll be like, hey, check it out. This is what needs to be this. I would change my body language. I change the way everything. The way I talk to them.
The way your head holds. The way
I'll even sit back and make it. So I'll sit back and look like I'm unentertained, and then they're like, man, he doesn't care, and then they'll tone it down
quick,
and then now I'm leaning forward and I'm having a conversation. Like, that stuff is what's missing, and I think perhaps the standards are high, but they're high in a weird way. They're like, let's do more life experience. That would be helpful, right? So I get it. They want to hire younger guys, and I'll tell you what, the hiring of younger people in Chicago in like the 90s, painted a hardcore picture. Those dudes were brutal to the public. They were 19 years old. They had no life experience. Now you're showing up to a 45-year-old man's house, and he's got a domestic with his wife. This kid's never had a girlfriend. How do you solve that problem? You know what I mean?
You shut up.
There should be a level of understanding, not only culturally, but what you're going to expect, and that's not what's being taught in the academies. That's some stuff that needs to be taught.
Raul, you have provided a lot of insight, and I think insight in a way that it doesn't divide an aisle. It just provides some information that, for some reason, nobody talks about. And not that I watch the news all the time, but I don't ever hear it come up. So we were talking about the training aspect and just the fighting and the overall preparedness. There's a couple different ways we can go with this, but specific to the person that doesn't have our life experience.
Yeah.
What can they do to prepare themselves?
So the most basic thing anyone and everyone should be able to do is at least run 10 minutes. Right?
Ooh, that's half. You just cut out half society.
And I don't want to cut you guys out. I want you guys to get that good. Here's the deal. Before vehicles and before convenience of all modern things, we had to move.
Yes.
This is what's changed everything. So not only, and it's not fitness for the sake of fitness, it's fitness for the sake of confidence. It's everything that comes, right? Running away or running towards. You need to be able to move. So we promote fitness because of the confidence that it gives you. It affords you that luxury, like, hey, if I really needed, so let's say you're inside the back of the Walmart and your wife is in the car and she calls you and said, there's a guy banging on my window. That's about a 5-minute run, depending on how badly you run. But you need to be able to run.
You got to be able to get there.
Yeah, and that's what's missing from people, the security blanket of society, and they're starting to see it now, right, with all the sporadic violence. But we promote that fitness so that you'll feel better, you're more confident, and it's your duty to be able to, one, if you're going to react to any situation, be able to breathe. Like, people don't know how to breathe well. Breathing alone will help
win a fight and tone it down. Yeah,
absolutely. And so that's why we're big on fitness. And I put out random videos on YouTube and everywhere. It's just like, hey, this is how you should do a push-up properly. Get to it. Here, do some high knees because it simulates running. Just the little things that we're missing that used to be in the 80s and 90s in the fitness programs when you would climb the highest.
It was normal.
Monkey bar thing.
Right.
Yeah. But now it's like no monkey bars because kids can fall. No push-up bars because kids can trip. I'm like, come on.
And this is a parent fail on my end. I saw my son try to jump a brick wall. And my son's 10.
Yeah.
I was jumping brick walls and jumping off of roofs when I was 10.
Yeah.
His palms got to the top and he just hung there. And I said, oh my gosh, Dom, as I'm talking to myself, you got to get it together. But what's crazy is when you learn how to fight and you're dialed in and you're in shape, like nobody messes with you.
Yeah.
And you talk about confidence. I call it command presence. There's a look you have in your eyes of assurity. And plus, fellas, no woman wants to be next to a man that can't handle business. I don't care what your background is. You got to be able to get some. But go ahead, sir.
No, I was going to say, I think that's why my girl likes me because I can brawl. So I took on an MMA fight last year on like a 3-month bucket list.
Okay, I like that.
And I trained incredibly hard with a lot of great dudes and a lot of input from people, right? And it's a quick story, but I did it as a bucket. It's like, I've always wanted to do this. I have time right now in this pocket of the year. I'm going to do it. So I signed up for it. I commit to the fight. Didn't know who I was fighting.
Right, of course.
I ended up fighting a dude 20 years younger than me.
All kind of energy.
All sorts of like,
ripped.
never gets tired.
Right.
Like, 6'3". I'm like, man, I'm a little guy. And I was nervous to the day. I was sitting in the back getting my hands around. I'm like, why am I doing this? I don't have to.
I don't need to do this.
This is absolutely completely a choice that I made.
Right. So smart or not, it's a choice.
And she was there, my biggest one. And I don't care if I lose and things like that because those are just setbacks and they teach me lessons to get better at things. So losing it's a complex thing, right? Losing is just another lesson, man. It's not a big deal, but people take it weird. People with too much ego and pride.
Man,
you've done nothing to earn that ego or pride. And those are the people that are hurt the most, right?
So true.
So I'm in the back. We get wrapped up, and the fight lasts 24 seconds, right? TKO in the first round. It was awesome. I smoked the kid.
Of course.
But it was, I think it was the 3 months of brutal preparation. And that was like, well, if 3 months gave me this, imagine what 6 months would do.
Right.
Imagine what a year of constant, consistent working out, what my body would perform. This like biological machine. And I think that, so when I see people that are out of shape, I'm like, hey, just do something, man. Your body's designed to work within a confine of a certain size. maximize that before you die. And it's like the old school Socrates guys and those dudes are like, hey, the body needs to be used to its max effect. It does. And people just don't. So this is why we promote fitness as through experiences, right?
Of course.
So everything that I've done between being a cop, between being a drill sergeant in the military, combat rotations, being a contractor, seeing the world from different eyes, and being able to have an influence, it allowed me to see certain things in certain third world countries where people, oh man, that's a poor country. Well, so guess what? Everybody's in shape. Everybody lives longer than Americans. You have the luxuries, they have to live life. Let's find a medium, and that's what we try to offer.
Balance. That medium, I love it. All right, folks, I bet you really didn't even know what you were going to get today, and this is what happens when you have two ex-cops on air. But if you're just tuning in, I'm Dom Faussette, and we're in studio with Raul Martinez, currently with Fieldcraft Survival, and training preparedness is what he does. He is I use the term ex-cop, prior military. And we've covered some topics about policing. And Raul, I want to talk about, I've never done this. I want to talk about non-race specific, non-gender specific, but let's just have a back and forth about police brutality.
Let's do it.
So it's, you and I'm not going to speak for you. I know that in certain elements, in certain cities, the gun is there, but fist and fighting is just the way of life. And we briefly touched on that on the top of the show. I also know that if there were cameras out when I was a police officer, at a minimum, I would have been fired.
Both of us.
Bro, I've been in internal affairs several times. Yeah. But there's also times I think that I would have gone to jail just because of the way I was fighting. And it just, if I can paint this picture real quick, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Folks, as a cop, when you leave the house, your goal is to get back home. And when you're fighting somebody that their goal is they don't have a home, they have a place that they live, but they don't care if they kill you. There's a fight that happens and you see it on the media. But then you don't know what that person went through, cop or the individual they're fighting, 5 minutes prior to that moment. Not making excuses for what the media shows, but do you recall any instances, I know the answer is yes, but do you recall any instances where you're just like, wow, had I not knocked that dude out, I would have been killed?
Yeah. So many times, actually. It's one of those like, hey, let me pick the right story. Exactly. You know what I mean? And to the point where, and you said it, right? Cops go to work, they're trying to get home. And that's a mind shift already, because that's not how cops thought before. Before it's like, hey, I'm going out to help somebody today.
It is.
And then I'm coming home and telling the story about how awesome my day was. It's shifted, but society has shifted, right? So that lack of education as to what a cop should be and what they should be able to do is a big thing, right? Cops now, they're like, man, I just want to get home. And then there's this like back the blue or the shield, and that divide happened because of the way the community is with law enforcement, and it's the education concept, right? Long ago, cops were happy dudes.
Right.
You see them, you'd wave, and they'd wave back, and they'd keep going. There was no like, oh, I'm going to stop this guy and talk. So both people in society, both types of people, so from the street level stuff to the cop stuff, they started digging more in. It has nothing to do with the people, man. You know what I think it is? It's the policies from the departments.
Departments
need to show numbers, right? So what do I do as a supervisor? And I need to show numbers for my district. Hey, Dom, I need more arrests. Hey, bro, well, guess what? Arrests aren't what we should be doing, right? But these guys now are arresting people. When you take somebody's freedom and put them in jail, it changes the way people act with you. Now nobody wants to go to jail, so guess what I'm going to do to not go to jail?
I'm going to beat the brakes.
I'm going to fight back.
Right.
So for me, arresting somebody, they needed to be, and I say that with force, they needed to be at fault or within reason where I was comfortable putting them in jail.
That makes sense.
Because stripping somebody's freedom is a big deal. Putting them in a box. Yeah, and how they're going to react when they know, man, it's game on. So fighting as a cop, so to circle back to the to the question itself. You have to know how to fight because now people are going to fight back.
And so people in the streets nowadays know how to fight.
They do.
It was when I was growing up.
How many MMA gyms are there?
Bro.
At every neighborhood here, there's an MMA school.
Nobody kicked when I was a kid. When I was a kid and we would fight, it was just fists.
Yeah.
Now, like, bro, you don't look like you can roundhouse. Well, first of all, where'd you learn how to roundhouse? Yeah. Let's have that conversation. But
Van Damme, bro.
Right. But there is. You're absolutely correct. There is a more skilled fighter, but then there's also a more skilled fighter in law enforcement.
There is,
and going back to standards, there's I know how to fight. I'm talking law, and I'm just talking my personal experience with cops I've seen. I know how to fight, but I've never been socked in the face.
Yes.
So I'm just gonna pull my gun out.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that. I don't know what you see, but what are your thoughts on that?
So in Chicago, it's twofold. You have some of the older cats.
Yeah.
That they'll pull out a nightstick and they'll go to town.
I love my PR-24.
Yeah. So, they don't care. We still get issued the wooden one.
The PR, yeah.
Beautiful craftsmanship. I still have mine. It's actually really awesome. But the old timers would be like, hey, I don't want to do this. And I know you don't want to do this, but we can. And then they would execute, right? That's how they would react. The younger guys now, because not being punched in the face, because not playing sports, because not being athletically, not having that prowess, right? Because there's one standard to join the department. There's no more standards after that. Once you're in, there's no more fitness standards. There's no more, hey, come in and fight a couple of the instructors. Let's see if you still have the ability to put cuffs on him, man. I will put $500 anywhere I go to guys that are in uniform and be like, you cannot put me in handcuffs. I guarantee it. $500, and they can't. They won't even take the bet.
Of course not. They're scared.
Yeah. So I had a program when I was teaching at the academy, and it was controversial. They're like, no, we can't even teach this. My program was, as instructors, we would wrestle the cop. He'd have to put handcuffs on me, all while me, as the bad guy, was taking things off of his belt. So I would strip cops of all of their kit. Just in a small grappling session. You had no radio, no cuffs, so no backup. I would get to the gun, and then they'd fight dear life for their gun. And while they're fighting for their gun, it's just a simulated punch to the face. How many of these can you take before you black out?
Right.
And none of them could do it. And that's the disparity, right? These guys don't know how to fight. They overreact emotionally. So before anything can escalate badly, they draw their gun, and now they've escalated it beyond.
And your pride disallows you from putting your gun back.
Yeah. And even violence, right? So I'm chasing a guy for another department, and he jumps a fence, goes through a gangway. I jump the other side, go through the gangway. We meet in the back of the house. So like we come out on the like opposite sides.
It's a very like
yeah.
Did time stand still when you guys met?
It did, because we looked at each other and we were both scared.
Right. That's so happened to me several times.
We come around this corner and we're like, oh shit. So I grabbed him.
Right.
I tag him. He's like, man, that's crazy. He's like talking shit. Cool guy. I'm handcuffing him, and then you can see the other cops that are emotionally compromised, but they were emotionally compromised because they were out of shape and couldn't breathe. So when they got there, they're like, and they're dropping knees on this guy. He's already cuffed, and I'm basically getting him up, and they're dropping knees on him, and I'm like, hey, mofo, stop.
Nice.
Like, this is
Chill
done.
out. We got this.
This is done. The guy was laughing at one point, but now he's pissed.
Right.
Because he's got 7 dudes kneeling him in the back of the head and the back of the body. And that inability to control your emotions comes from fitness, comes from that confidence we talked earlier in the show.
Yes, it does.
So just having that alone changes how we deal with people, because I can always pull out of a situation, right? Even as a cop, I can be like, hey, just stand by, call for backup. Now there's more dudes, so with more people involved, it's less bullshit, less nonsense, right? Because now there's 19 eyes. You got 10 officers show up. 10 officers, 20 sets of eyes. Now everybody's being a little more professional, right? Even on the other end, me, if I saw 20 dudes in uniform,
like, I'm going to chill. You guys won.
You get it.
Yahtzee.
Yeah. But that patience of backup, and they teach that, but then what happens? A prideful young copper is like, I don't need backup. I got this. Well, guess what, dude? The guy you're dealing with, career criminal by choice or not, is more prone to violence, more willing to execute, and he's already comfortable in jail. So he's just going back to what he's
good
to.
If he goes back. I think there comes a time in I think every cop's lifespan as it relates to their job where they have that thought of, do I really want to do this? And I think that's the most dangerous place for a cop to be. When I had that moment, I put my 2 weeks notice in.
Half in, half out.
Yeah.
You can't work like that in this field.
And a lot of cops do that because the cop's mindset, and unfortunately a lot of soldiers think this way, what else am I going to do?
Yeah.
But you've obviously found success on the other side of the badge.
And it's not easy.
No, it's not.
We talked a little bit. There's this moment of disparity in oneself. Well, now I'm not with the brotherhood in the military. Now I'm not with the brotherhood in law enforcement. I don't have a badge. I don't have this make-believe power. Your power comes from the community, not from your badge. How you treat the people, that's your power. That's why I was so successful in law enforcement. I was called a one-year wonder. I was going to narcotics units within 1 year of clearing probation. I was going to after 1 year of that, I was over here, but it's because of the relationships. So people matter, but people forget that, right? So the ability to bring all that together, right? To separate yourself when it's time, or keep yourself in when you're all about it. Right. But when you leave, you have to find something that makes sense to you. And this is just a quick shout out to the soldiers that are getting out and the guys that are thinking about leaving law enforcement. There is more. Just take the time to learn it.
There's a lot more.
Yourself. There's so much more.
And be okay.
You're a successful radio host. I mean, you're awesome. People can do things like this.
Can we repeat that last part you just said?
You get one freebie.
There we go. But even myself, when I got out, I was like, and I told you this before we went on air, I just needed to carry a gun. I didn't know what I didn't want to be a security guard, and I couldn't get picked up for a contract gig, so I just wanted to carry a gun. But then in law enforcement, it's the same mindset. But I feel that cops, and if you're in the military thinking about getting out, and you're a first responder, think about the same thing. Your ability, your leadership acumen is much needed in the corporate space.
Yes.
And the money, you can not double, but you can make so much more money and have a greater impact on lives. Even now, you're Fieldcraft's survival instructor. You impact lives probably more today than you did previously. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. Every weekend, for the most part, over the last 2 years, we interact with 40 to 50 people a weekend.
What's the website?
So fieldcraftsurvival.com is the website itself for the company. It's a military disabled veteran special forces owned company with a team of law enforcement guys, SWAT guys, ex-narcotics guys, just a blend of everything, leadership that went to do a private company to then share it with the community. So that's what we do. Mike Lover, the owner of the company, he's the SF head of the whole thing, and then he brought on the guys that made sense. So how can we impact the community more? Well, let's bring law enforcement guys in.
Makes
Boom.
sense.
So now here we are. Now I'm on the company. We need a self-defense fitness program. Cool. Boom. Now I'm in doing this, doing gun training, doing combatives, doing all the things that people, like I said earlier, should know how to do.
So true.
Just to survive everyday life. Confidence, going to the store. I've trained people that were afraid to go into stores. We trained for a couple hours. They're the most confident people in the world, right? But just that little bit. But so the company itself, we travel the whole country. We travel overseas to other places and teach other countries as well.
You guys travel a lot.
We do.
I mean, me trying to get you here took almost 3 to 4 months.
Yeah,
so you guys travel a lot.
I was like, hey, I'm sorry, man. Schedule changed.
Exactly.
But it happens. And the whole goal is to continue to go. And everywhere I go, I tell the people, hey, you just met 20 to 30 people that are near you. Use them as friends. That's like the message from our company is everywhere we go, you're going to meet 20 people in this class. Of those 20 people, somebody lives within a 2-hour drive. Guess what? Now you have another ally. Now you have another friend. Get together. Build yourselves up. Build more people up. Teach other people. When we teach people to be teachers, not just users. I don't want you to just know this information. I want you to be able to teach this information. So our philosophy is to make people empowered and better versus, hey, here's what we did as cool guys.
Now, for a person showing up, do they have to show up with all the tactical gear, the weapons? Do they have to show up?
They have to show up with enough to take the course.
That makes sense.
Right?
Okay.
So, and there's a course description in
That's
there,
on the website.
and it gives them everything they need.
Okay.
They don't need much.
Okay.
They just need their equipment and they need some experience.
That makes
we do
sense.
have now fundamental classes because of the amount of people that have just bought new firearms.
Of course.
So we have programs for them as well.
I like that.
But people can just come in and people come and observe. Sometimes families just hang out and they're like, oh, wow, I learned more just not being involved. Because I could hear every word and not be worried about executing those words.
Okay.
So it's a really great, it's a great company in the sense that we get to travel everywhere. So if you guys aren't following Fieldcraft Survival, follow Fieldcraft Survival on Instagram. We're on YouTube as well. You can follow me on Instagram at raul.martinez.jr. I'll have a YouTube channel eventually.
There it is.
It'll come out. But just you have resources, folks. Don't freak out about feeling alone or nobody understands our struggles. We've been there. You've been there.
Been there,
so
done that.
If people have questions, reach out. I tend to answer everything. I get a lot of guys like, hey, what do I do now transitioning out of this? And if I have a second, I'll give them a shout out. But again, come to the classes. I tell way more war stories in classes because it's personal, right?
Yeah, and they get it.
Yeah, and then they understand it. So everything from law enforcement to ex-military guys to the first gun owner. So
I love it. I love it. Folks, thank you very much for listening, watching. Raul Martinez Jr., thank you very much for being here in studio. Again, I'm Dom Faussette, your host of the Think React Lead radio show here on 960 The Patriot, KKNT. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you on the other side.